Oh, now it's recording in progress. Okay, there we go. Yes, thank you very much. So, and thanks for having me on as a panelist. So, my name is David Posner. I'm with HomeCare.com. I've been in the healthcare industry for about 20 years. I've been in senior care for the last 10. And basically, what my company does is we actually help families provide one-on-one nurse aides in the home. So that can be physically in the home, or it can be inside assisted livings. And so some of the questions that we're going to talk about today are in regards to caregivers, how they work, what they can do, what they can't do. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about cost and more or less, overall being able to help and support those with Alzheimer's and make sure their loved ones are well taken care of. HomeCare.com is about 12 states. So those calling from outside the Washington, D.C. metro area, which we're based out of, I'm happy to help out. So again, any questions, please leave in the comment box and we'll get right to this. So I want to kind of start off by, one of the biggest misconceptions is the differences between dementia and Alzheimer's. A lot of people use them interchangeably, but in reality, it's actually two different terms in the sense of dementia is actually the general term for someone with mental ability severe enough to interfere with their daily life. So there's actually 400 different types of dementia out there. And Alzheimer's is just one of the most popular ones. It's the most, the way it affects the brain, we'll kind of talk a little about. I don't want to get too much into detail on that one, but basically the differences between just dementia and Alzheimer's is dementia is the overall field for cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. So just want to kind of break those two out for those, to start off. But, I know part of this presentation is about legal. So I'm going to have Chantelle answer their first question as far as, let's break down, the most common question when someone has dementia: what are they allowed to sign? What are they not allowed to sign? So what are what documents should they have kind of prepared up?
So as I mentioned, there's 4 documents that we often look at when we're talking to families about estate planning, and it is a will, sometimes a trust, a power of attorney, and a medical directive. So the will is kind of traditionally what people think as far as estate planning goes, right? It's what pops up in the movies. It's what everyone thinks of as like the major estate planning document. What a will does, it assigns your assets after death. So for a will, you need to have testamentary capacity. What does this mean? Some basics: you have to be over 18. And then you need to understand that you are making a will. There are a lot of legal terms that go into the will. It's not necessary that you understand every single one of those, but just generally you need to understand that you're creating a will. You need to know what your property is, right? Again, not down to the penny, but it's very important to know where you bank, that you have a retirement account from your 30 years of work, that you had a family farm that you sold 10 years ago, right? Just some basic concepts of understanding what your property is. You need to know who your family members and next of kin are, even if you're going to disinherit them, even if you don't like them, right? You need to be able to say, yes, I have 4 kids. I like 2, the other 2, so we want to make sure that you have a good sense of that. And this actually does come up, as people unfortunately age and dementia sets in. I spoke with a potential client. He didn't realize that his daughter was on the call with him, not his wife or his sister. So again, just having a general sense of who your family members are. And then finally, you need to understand that in working to create a will, working with a team, that you are putting together a plan to dispose of the property, right? And so that it's all of these little pieces coming together, and that forms your testamentary capacity. Knowing you want to create a will, knowing what that's going to say, generally who family is, generally what your property is. We're looking for that. Okay, so that is your lowest level of capacity. Taking it up a step would be if we look to create a trust. Trusts are slightly more complex than wills anyways, and it's important to know what you're signing, right? So with a trust, we're looking for more of like a contractual capacity. It's going to say, you need to understand obviously the nature of this legal document and that there's benefits of the trust. Like the trust doesn't go to court. But there's also a risk because you're giving somebody power during your lifetime. So it's a heavier sense than just the testamentary capacity, although it does often have the same end result function of distributing your assets to people that you want. So that's a will and a trust. The highest level is going to be when we look at a power of attorney. So a power of attorney gives somebody the ability to make legal and financial decisions during your lifetime. Okay, that's about as simple as I can get that statement out there. I tried to condense, but and people say, well, why would I want this? And it's really, you're saying, well, maybe as I age, I need help with my finances, balancing my checkbook, savings accounts, making sure credit cards are paid, right? These basic day-to-day functions you might want to appoint to somebody. That's fantastic. Again, giving them a lot of power. So need to be able to understand that you are creating that special relationship. That would be a very simple power of attorney. As you work up, working to a power of attorney that has tax provisions, right? Or if you are a business owner and you're giving somebody the ability to run your business, that's going to have a higher level of capacity. So these can be tailored, but when we work with clients, we need to make sure that what we're putting together is something that they understand and that they understand that agency relationship they're creating. Final document is a healthcare proxy or medical directive. And this is really what we're looking here is we want to see that the client is capable of understanding the consequence of the actions. So by default, if somebody has capacity and is able to make their own medical decisions, that's a presumption, right? We're going to presume that they are able to do that. So it's important to say, okay, well, we want to get ahead of that curve. We want to get a medical directive in place while they are able to make medical decisions so that if that time comes, they've identified their medical agent. Make sense? You're on mute, David.
So yeah, I was trying to be respectful and not talk while you're talking, so I put myself on mute. So no, that's great. I appreciate that. One of the questions I get from a lot of my families is just understanding the different types. So I know there's different types of trusts. I've also had families that have walked into a bank, they had a will, or excuse me, they had a power of attorney, but then the bank wouldn't accept it. So can you kind of go a little bit more deeper into some of, trust and power of attorney as far as is there a timeline? And I know Lisa asked a question as far as do you have to declare someone incompetent before moving into certain places? So can you kind of go a little bit deeper into some of those areas you touched on?
Absolutely. The declaration of incompetence, as far as legal documents being triggered, it depends. So going to that power of attorney question, there is what's called a springing power of attorney that is only triggered upon incapacity. So you would have a doctor's note in hand, as well as a power of attorney document before you're able to make decisions for the person who put those together. Okay, so it's adding in a layer of protection for the client to say, only upon incapacity can you now manage my bank accounts. Okay. Going to David, your question about, going into that bank and sometimes you're turned away. It depends. Okay. Usually powers of attorney are structured so that they are effective forever or until death. However, you can absolutely put a time limit on them. You can limit the powers, right? How I said you could have a very basic power of attorney, you could have a broad in scope. So sometimes they're being turned away, maybe not because it's oh, this is 10 years old. That's probably not it. But they might not be able to use it because of the terms of the power of attorney are not broad enough, or the proper language isn't reflected. So each state has its own laws, especially with trust in estates, right? So some states have a form power of attorney, like Maryland. New York does as well. So if you walked into a bank with an outside document in Maryland that's not one of those forms, the bank tellers might not be familiar with it. They might send you to legal. So you might just have to have an extra hurdle there to get that document cleared to be able to use it. But overall, I mean, usually these documents do not expire. If they were properly executed at that time, they should have been, if they were drafted by an attorney, they should have that flexibility, that sustainability to continue on. So it's important to have an attorney actually look at this and draft it for you so that you get that long-term coverage that you need. Talking about trusts, right? So as I mentioned, a trust is kind of like a will. It transfers assets on death. The two big categories of a trust would be a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. A revocable trust is often called a living trust. This is probably what I get asked about the most, right? If people aren't coming to me for a will, they're maybe saying, well, what's the difference between a will and a trust? So with your living trust, you would create it during your lifetime. You control the assets during your lifetime, which is really nice. And then when you pass away, the trust says, my two kids split my assets, or maybe I'm sending a cash gift over to a grandchild. However, grandchild's a minor, so I'm going to put some rules and restrictions on there. Grandchild's going to get this money when they're 21 or when they graduate from college. So you were allowed to put rules in a trust, and that's a really nice planning tool, especially for people who want to, give to grandchildren or give to a younger generation. Irrevocable trust, you are generally turning over power to somebody else. It is used for asset protection, to protect assets, and for that to hold up, you can't enjoy them and you can't control them. So it's a more complex instrument. If I'm creating them, I'm usually working with the clients like financial advisor, CPA. We're trying to figure out what assets actually should go into an irrevocable trust because it's not appropriate to hold everything. So those are the two basic kind of buckets of trust. Did I cover that, David? Yeah.
Yeah, you did good.
Okay.
But and I understand it, but again, if you guys out there and Lisa, if you need further clarification, just go ahead and put it in the chat box, so we can kind of. But yeah, no, that was great. I appreciate the deep dive on that.
Yep, absolutely. The one thing that I want to bring up for wills that is often a misconception is, and I actually just had this conversation yesterday with a client or a consult, and he told me, I have this will so I don't have to go to court. And I was like, wait, no, your will actually goes to court. Okay, so that is a big difference between a will and a trust. Will goes to court. It's what the judge or commissioner actually looks at to determine how assets will be distributed. Right now, our probates are probably about a year to 2 years long at best. Wow. Oftentimes we're often extending out to 3 to 5 years. It is stressful. It gets expensive. So a trust does not go to probate, but a will absolutely does. The will is that court document that will be reviewed.
That's great stuff. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to try to address the question in the chat right now about incompetence to be placed in a memory care facility? I think we cover that kind of later on, but if you want me to jump to that now, I'm happy to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we hit on it later on. So okay. We'll do it with the other questions.
All right.
We might follow up.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so let's leave the legal world and let David chat for a little bit. So please tell us, what are long-term care options for people?
Yeah, so there's three main care options as far as living, where can someone stay that's safe. So the three are basically, number one is in the home with a home care aide. Number two is assisted living with a lockdown unit. And number three is actually a memory care facility community. So let me kind of break those down and kind of go in a little bit more detail. So first is home care. So if you want your loved one to be at home and you want to hire an aide inside the home, the first thing you want to do is make sure that aide is licensed. And a lot of different titles out there, from CNA, HHA, PCA, but as long as they have a license, it's pretty good. I can go into that a little bit more detail later. But what the aide can do in the home is 3 levels of care. So it's companionship, which is basically just making sure that your loved one is safe. Then there's personal care, and this is in the legal world also known as ADLs, or activities of daily living. Some of these will include bathing and toileting and dressing and grooming, so a little bit more hands-on. And then there's also advanced personal care. So working with a caregiver that understands memory care, or a dementia or cognitive impairment or Parkinson's or stroke. So all of those things an aide or a caregiver can do in the home. And when you do start to think about a loved one, care aide in the home, you want to think about schedules. And so these caregivers can work, usually the minimum is about 4 hours a day, and it can go all the way up to 24, even live-in cases. So it's a big range as far as what they can do. And of course, you can break up the days. That's one of the bigger advantages of having having an aide in the home versus an assisted living or memory care community. Now, the reasons you would go and look at a memory care community would be if mom or dad is starting to be aggressive. Maybe mom or dad is starting to try to get out and wander out of the building. So where you really need that eyes on full time. Now, aides can do that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when you start to look at assisted livings, I know I'm using the term like lockdown unit, but that's actually, it's true, but it's actually for their safety. Because once you start to have Alzheimer's and dementia, wandering is one of the big things that does happen. And so all the assisted livings that do have a lockdown unit, they might be also called reminiscence or memory care or some type of that. That's where their a loved one's got basically a nice good ratio of about 4 nurses to per family, and they've got room to be able to walk around. And there's actually going to be things in the corner to help distract them, to help relieve any type of aggression. Then moving on to a memory care facility, memory care community. This is a building that's specific for memory care. So they would have more of a higher ratio of nurses to family members. And it's going to be circles so that person can walk around at all hours. They're going to have certain stations that may include music, art, sounds, so different things that are going to be able to help distract them. And also on the memory care communities, they also have things that are brain games and stuff to really stimulate the brain to be able to help out. So those are 3. I know it's a little bit long answer to your question, but those are the 3 areas that when someone's a loved one is looking for a place, it can be at home with a personal care aide. It can be inside assisted living, maybe in a reminiscence. That's what Sunrise calls it here in the DC area. Or memory care community, something like an Arden Courts. So here's, with a lot of times I get questions regarding, with these communities. A lot of us have seen the movie I Care on Netflix. And I know, Chantelle, every time I mention that movie, you always shake your head. It's a crazy movie. But, one of the scariest things, and this kind of goes to Lisa's point, is can someone be forced into some of the assisted livings or memory cares or nursing homes that I mentioned? And, to Lisa's questions, if someone's declared incompetent, what is the proceedings for that? So can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yes, absolutely. Short answer of forcing somebody into a care facility is yes, you can. It depends on who has that power. So within Virginia, we're limited to 10 days. If I create a power of attorney or a medical directive that appoints an agent for me, they have that ability. And my instruments that I prepare for most of my clients actually have that language. So if I need care, if I need to be in a facility for 10 days, even over my objections, right now it's my husband, can put me there, okay? Because he's my medical agent. But if you think about this from a dementia standpoint, that's an important power to give your agent, because they are protecting that person. They're saying, you need to go here, you need a higher level of care, and maybe as a family and caregivers, we need to take a step back, okay? So it's up to 10 days. If you don't have directives in place and you need somebody to be declared incompetent, you go to court. That is a guardian or a conservator procedure. The guardian is to appoint somebody to care for the person. The conservator is the money. So it can be split into 2 different factors, but a lot of times the one person is appointed as both. So what that process involves is you actually file a petition with the judge, right? And it's going to include the petitions that I would draft up would have kind of a timeline of, you identify who the family members are, what the initial onset of disease was, what general, as David mentioned, ADLs are. You know, what does this person's general life look like, and why is this needed? Are we wandering? Are we aggressive? Are we like putting our socks in the refrigerator and our eggs in our sock drawer? You know, these are things that we want to try to explain, because when you declare somebody incompetent, you're taking away their rights to some extent, and you want to be very careful. You want to make sure it is as narrowly tailored as you possibly can. So, law firm usually puts together a petition. Along with that, we file a physician's report, because I am no medical professional and I do not pretend to be. So you want a physician who is very familiar with that person's care, with how they have progressed or declined over the last few years. And then you're also going to have a guardian ad litem come in. That is a neutral third party appointed by the court who will meet with your family member, right? They'll sit down with mom and say, Mom, what's going on? Just have a conversation and see it. And they'll have a very good sense. They're specially trained. They'll have a good sense of, again, what type of protection is going to be needed, what level of incompetence is there. So all of these pieces come together at a hearing. Goal of walking out of that hearing is you have an order from a judge that then says, mom shouldn't drive anymore, mom can't vote, mom needs help with X, Y, and Z. Mom needs legal documents put together. You can now, help mom with a basic trust or with a basic will. So you can specifically request language in that order, again, to tailor into what your family member might actually need. So the difference between these two is, with a medical directive power of attorney, I'm picking who I want to represent my interests. If I don't have those in place and I have lost the capacity to create those documents, we go to court and we hope a loved one is going to step forward, and then we're letting that judge then decide what power should be granted.
That's perfect. That's exactly. But what if, let me just throw these what if situations. What if the family can't agree? Or we have, several sisters and brothers and we all want different things. How does that play out? Does the oldest always win? Do they always get to be the head person in charge, or is it whoever got the most money wins? Or how do you, if you've got families that are fighting and want completely different things, how does that work? Is there a priority list?
To some extent, although I was going to tell you, you could have just stopped at sisters fighting, because it's usually just the sisters who are fighting. So there is a priority list. And again, think about what we've talked about. Okay, our power of attorney medical directive. If that is what I put together, and now I am let's say mom. Okay, if mom has put those together and mom has identified who her agents are, that gets priority. Mom could pick one kid. Mom could pick her best friend. Mom could pick the neighbor. It doesn't necessarily have to be the oldest or the most wealthy or the most verbal. It's who mom wants. Okay, so if we have documents that mom has created, we respect those. If not, we look to if there's a court appointed guardian. If so, that stands. Absent having a legal document or court appointed for medical decisions, there is absolutely hierarchy. Okay, so we're going to look first to a spouse. If there is no spouse, we then look to adult children. If there are multiple adult children who do not agree, we take the consensus of who is present. Okay, so this is going to apply to any of the further classes. So really, from adult children on, we're just going to look to family relationships. So adult child, if not, we look to a parent. If parents are no longer with us, an adult sibling. So keep working your way out on that family tree in descending order of blood relationship. All else fails, you still can't, there's two adult children and they are just going at it, you go to court. Because eventually one of them is going to have to step up and petition to be guardian or conservator. Okay. So anything we can do to avoid court, we would like to do, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, court gets expensive for sure.
Absolutely. So talking about expenses, can you give us more numbers about cost of care? Because I know that I get asked that a lot. So that's great to know.
Yeah, no, it's the number one question is, how do I pay for this? How much does it cost? And does my regular Blues and Aetnas pay for this? So, the obvious answer when anybody talks about cost is it all depends. And when I say it all depends, it's the good news is it depends on basically three factors. Location, because cost in Washington D.C. is completely different than rural America. It's going to depend on the size. So, either that's a schedule or that's the size of a building, as well as, and last thing would be function. So what are we talking about something that just needs a simple safety and support, or are we talking about hospice and really hands-on type of care? So all three of those factors really kind of start to go into cost. But I do want to give you an answer because I like you so much. I want to be able to give you some dollar figures. So let's talk about, and we're going to be specific for the Washington, D.C. metro area, because that's where we both live. And what I did was I actually pulled the information from Genworth. So Genworth is a long-term care insurance company that puts out a cost of care survey every single year. So if you Google Genworth cost of care, you can start to get the estimates that I'm going to go over right now, but you can look it up for your own area. So let's start with home care. So home care, we're talking about a one-on-one nurse aide in the home can range anywhere between $65 and $35 an hour. Again, that range is based off of schedule, it's based off of locations, based off of needs, but basically about $26 to $35 an hour on average. When we start to look into assisted livings, memory care communities, we're talking more about a monthly rate. That's going to be anywhere from $6,000 to $13,000. I know it's a bigger range, so I apologize, but again, it's based off of location, it's based off of need. So 6,000 is on the lower end as far as, and this is DC metro area, but it is, assisted livings. When we talk about assisted livings, we're talking about like the lower end as far as health needs. So again, where the person doesn't need as much, but within assisted livings, each additional need, that might be additional medications that being administered either once a day versus 3 times a day, or once a day versus moving into an reminiscence or memory care community, that part that I mentioned earlier. So that's where that range comes in, that 6 to 13,000, as well as amenities and everything else. So the other part of this question is, how am I paying for this? So the good news is long-term care insurance does pay for this. So when I say long-term care insurance, I'm thinking about Genworth, John Hancock, not the Blues, not the Aetnas, not your health insurance, but long-term care insurance. Will actually help pay for both home care and assisted livings. Also, if you're a veteran or family member or spouse was a veteran, those are also able to help support. And I have a contact, so if those are veterans are looking for assistance, please feel free to contact me later. And I have a partnership with Veterans Association to be able to help get that, what criteria you have to meet to be able to meet that type of criteria. But basically, that's about 20% of my families have some type of long-term care insurance or veterans benefits. About 80% of my families are paying out of pocket, either again for home care or assisted living. So when you think about costs, think about 3 main factors. Number 1 is location. Number 2 is the schedule. And number 3 is the needs. And this will start to determine your overall cost of care.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. I didn't know if you were still going.
Sorry.
Okay. No, it's fine. So on the insurance and the attorney and me and my liability concerns, if I wanted to bring an aide into my home or into my home for my mother, right? Do I have to worry about insurance, or like what if the aide breaks something or steals something, or what are the risks?
Yeah, obviously we don't want that to happen, but unfortunately, from time to time something does happen. Either a caregiver breaks something or parks in the wrong spot, or something happens, and who's responsible. So the good news is when you're working with a company, an agency, they usually have some type of umbrella policy on each of the caregivers. So if something does happen in the home, a lot of times the home care company will be able to have insurance that will cover it. If you're working, some people want to go out, hire their own caregiver to do it, or, hire somebody off Craigslist, which I highly don't recommend. But, in that case, you have to make sure that caregiver has some type of insurance policy on them to make sure that it is covered if they are doing anything inside your house. Obviously, your own home insurance policy will help cover some of that. But yes, absolutely, because things do happen, not a lot. And the more background you do on the caregiver, the better. But yes, most agencies do have something that if a caregiver does break something, that they do have insurance to help cover that.
So aside from insurance, what other questions should I be asking to make sure I'm getting the right caregiver? Like, how do I address specific things like the wandering risk or aggressiveness, or kind of the less palatable things that you actually want to have to talk about, but that you need to make sure you're bringing the right person into a home?
Yeah, it's the funny thing about our business is no one really thinks about needing an aide until they absolutely need one. No one's thinking, let me phrase that. Hardly anybody thinks about, oh, I'm going to need an aide five weeks from now. Usually mom was being discharged from the hospital, mom's being discharged from a rehab, and boom, I need a caregiver tomorrow because I can't take care of mom. I've got to go to work. And so I see these types of situations happen a lot. So, but when we talk about dementia, we talk about Alzheimer's or any of the major, diseases, or even stroke, Parkinson's, it is important to make sure that you vet either the company and or a caregiver. And so I want to break this down to three categories. I'm a numbers guy, so I always like categories. So we're going to talk about credentials, experience, and knowledge. So first, let's talk about credentials. Without a doubt, you want to make sure two things. One, if you're working with an agency, that they are a registered company. And two, if you're working with a caregiver, you want to make sure that they are licensed. Now, some of the licensing, there's actually a variety, but some of the license might include a CNA, which stands for Certified Nurse Aide, HHA, Home Health Aide, PCA, Personal Care Aide. I'm not going to go into the, what's the difference or what's better or what's worse. It all basically is revolving around training and how much training and experience and stuff like that they have. But the most important thing is to make sure that A, the caregiver does have a license, and B, that it is valid. If you want, you can also verify the caregiver's license by going on the website. So plug in your state, so Virginia Nurse Aide License, and you can plug in the person's name or their license number to see if it's valid and updated. But most importantly, you want to make sure that the caregiver does have a valid license. The second thing we're going to talk about is experience. So especially when we talk about dementia, we talk about Parkinson's, we talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about cognitive impairment, we talk about the higher level. We want to make sure that the caregiver has experience with this specific needs, right? So besides making sure that the caregiver has several years of experience, and the reason that's important is because if you hire someone right out of nursing school, the experience of being able to deal with mom or dad that's a wandering risk or aggressive or elopement is completely different. It's challenging. So one is making sure that they have experience and being able to ask them for references as always, but really starting to kind of dive into what types of experience do they have. Have they worked at one of the communities, assisted living or memory care communities that I mentioned earlier? Have they worked with other families that have had dementia-related disease or Alzheimer's specifically? So again, you want to make sure that their experience level matches up. And lastly, you can verify that by their knowledge. And so I wanted to throw out a couple questions that you should be asking the caregiver specifically on what their level of experience is. And some of these questions might be, number one would be, how would you handle my mom if she begins to wander? So we know with sundowning that family members start to wander. That's why all of the communities that I mentioned earlier all have lockdown units. And so how would you handle that? A bad answer to that question is, I keep eyes on mom and I'll watch her wherever she goes. A more experienced caregiver might say something like, if I start to notice that she starts to wander or go to the store, I'm going to use some type of distraction. I'm going to start to ask her to play a game. I'm going to ask her to watch some television, but I'm going to distract her to stop the wandering and move her over. Another great question you can ask is, what if mom starts to become aggressive? What, verbally, sexually, emotionally, how are you going to handle that? Again, a caregiver that with a lack of experience might say, well, I just let it happen, or I let it pass, or I try to defend myself. But a more experienced caregiver might say something like, if she feels mad, if she feels either A, try to figure out what the root of that problem is. Maybe she's waiting for someone to come and they haven't arrived yet. I could simply just say, hey, your loved one will be here shortly. Maybe they're upset because, something just happens, like someone just said that their loved one passed away, and being able to adjust and distract and try different things. Again, what you're hearing me say is a good caregiver is going to be able to distract and move the person in a completely different direction. So again, if they're being aggressive, verbally, sexually, and let me say, these caregivers, at least the ones that we have on our company, they're amazing because they deal with physical abuse. I think a lot of my caregivers have been hit, unfortunately, have been verbally attacked and been called names that I would never, ever hope that anybody would ever say. But these caregivers kind of understand that that's the dementia talking. That's not them. That's not who they are in their heart. And so they're able to say, hey, Mrs. Johnson, let's try this. Hey, Mrs. Johnson, let's try that, and move and distract. And even though they got hit or verbally abused, they still come back the next day. And so these caregivers are absolutely amazing. But one of the last questions to start to think about would be, what if mom refuses to take her medication? What if mom refuses to allow you, the caregiver in home? One of the biggest questions I get is, I got to talk to my mom because I don't think she's going to let a caregiver in the home, or she had a bad experience with a caregiver and she's going to lock them out. Or, one of the reasons mom ended up in the hospital is because she forgot to take her medication. And so how do you deal with that? And so again, a caregiver with a lack of experience will say, well, I'll just keep trying, or I'll make sure she takes her medication. Maybe I'll slide it into her drinks or her food or something like that. But an experienced caregiver may say something along the lines of, on the medication side, giving her a heads up. Hey, Mrs. Johnson, we're going to take our medication in about 2 minutes. Hey, Mrs. Johnson, after you're done finishing your food, we're going to take the medication, so that she's not surprised by the medication, so she knows it's a cue that it's coming up. When we talk about caregiver refusing to allow the caregiver in the home, again, a bad caregiver might say, well, I'm just going to keep knocking, or I'll try, or whatever. But some of the best caregivers will try different ways to be able to get into the home, legally. And what I mean by that is they might say, oh, I'm just right, legally for you. They might say, oh, I'm not here to watch over you, Ms. Johnson. I'm here to keep an eye on the dog. Or I'm here just to do a safety check of the home. Again, the most important thing for that caregiver is that they're able to get into the home so they can assess and make sure that your loved one is being safe. And the good caregivers know how to do that. They might even, I know caregivers that actually go to their car, put a different t-shirt on, and then come back and say, oh, hey, how are you? I was just called to be able to stop by and say something. So again, they have different tips and tricks to be able to know what they need to be able to get in. So overall, when we talk about questions and making sure that the person has experience and knowledge, is going through why you're on this webinar today, or going through, what you're currently going through, and being able to ask the caregiver real life situations of, hey, my mom starts to do this around 6 o'clock. How would you handle that? And making sure they are able to answer it. I know this wasn't part of the questions. One of the other things I want to talk about is accents. So a lot of times I get families who say, well, my mom does not like accents. And let me just be honest, in the DC metro area, about 80% of our caregivers have an accent. But that doesn't mean that they're not a great caregiver. They have done probably like 20 years of nursing in their home country. And now they come here and they've been here for 5-10 years. And so, yeah, the dialect might be a little bit, but it's amazing what they're able to do. And their heart and they care. And so, yes, even if that caregiver does have a little bit of accent, again, if they have the knowledge, if they have 10, 15 years of experience, that's the key thing to be able to work with mom. And trust me, if they've been in this industry for 5, 10, 15 years, and they've been dealing with all these, physically, emotionally things, this is where their heart is. They love to do it. This isn't some kid out of college that's just looking for a job that's just trying to do something. So again, all of those things matter when you're starting to look into it. So hope that helps answer the question.
Absolutely, thank you. I was checking out our chats. I think that we addressed the one about the being admitted and being declared, but I think there was one about having documents recognized across state lines, and maybe I didn't cover that, but just really quickly. So yes, typically if you have legal documents drawn up in one state, they are recognized across state lines, including a trust. Always want to consult an attorney in that state where parents are moving to, right? So if parents lived in Virginia and were moving to New York, you want to have somebody barred in New York take a look. You know, is that power of attorney okay? Are there any questions about the trust? There are tax laws that are different in every state. So as you start to figure out where mom and dad are going to be settling as they age, and especially with the higher level of care need, it's worth taking a look at what existing documents are, and if there is any standing capacity right now, to make sure that things are updated before you have to go to court. So I believe that we are at time, and no other questions came in. So David, do you want to pop up our contact information?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you see that okay?
Yes, I can. We did get one more. It says, is a will needed if there is a trust? Yes. So a will that works with a trust is called a pour over will. A trust has to be properly funded to work, meaning assets need to be allocated over to the trust. While our contact information is up, I'm happy to answer any of these legal questions for really anybody. So if you want to reach out to me, you can email, call. I will pop my email in the chat box. Looks like my phone number is up there. But you can feel free to contact me directly. I do consultations with families. We are usually doing phone calls, but if we are working with somebody who potentially might have memory care issues, I would want to do a video, and you know, the caregiver, the adult child, is absolutely welcome to be on that call as well. I realize that sometimes there's a little hesitancy there on who can be on the call too, but I work with a lot of families on multi-generational planning, so always happy to help.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having us. And yeah, same thing with me. So my contact information is here. My phone number, my email address. You know, again, feel free to contact me anytime to be able to answer questions. So, and as Chantelle said, this was, you know, we can also do consultations. So, you know, one of the things we didn't really talk about today, but I'm happy to help answer questions when we talk about hospice, when we talk about therapy, when we talk about care management, you know, within senior care. And as you move into, you know, family members that have loved ones with Alzheimer's, dementia, and other cognitive impairment, you know, the senior care industry is amazing. And there is a lot of great resources available from, like I said, care managers, placement agencies, home health, hospice, assisted livings, rehabs, independent livings. So there's a lot of great contact, a lot of great information. If you have any questions regarding anything regarding your loved one, again, feel free to contact me or email me. I'm happy to help set up a call to be able to answer any questions you have. I'll leave the legal stuff to her, and I'll handle the healthcare stuff. And we both have contacts for financials too. So
Yes, we do. We work with lots of financial advisors, CPAs. So it is a fantastic network to be in, and we all understand that everyone's just looking out for their family, so, or loved ones, friends. I think that's it. We are at time. As I said, we are going to get you guys out right on time. And so hopefully everyone enjoys the rest of your day. If you're in the DMV area, stay cool because it's crazy. But thank you so much for joining, guys.
thanks, everyone. Have a good week.